Welcome to AutoComplete, the podcast all about the intersection of automobiles and technology, brought to you by Roadshow. I'm Brian Cooley, Roadshow editor-at-large, coming to you with episode 11 on this 24th of March. We're taping today. That's going to be important. You're going to find out in just a moment. We're going to start the show off, though, by leaving our studio here in San Francisco and going straight to New York City, where the New York International Auto Show is just getting started, and we've got a lot of people on the ground there from the Roadshow team. The gang's going to fill us in now on what was making the most headlines there, including what caught my eye from some new higher-range Toyota plug-in hybrids that have been announced, as well as an interesting new Targa Miata. Let's get the full drop now.
Welcome to AutoComplete, live on tape from the New York International Auto Show. My name is Tim Stevens. I'm editor-in-chief of Roadshow, and I'm joined by Mr. Chris Pauker, managing editor at Roadshow. Chris, how are you?
Fantastic. Great to be here.
We are live here on the show floor, delayed slightly for broadcast on the interweb. We're sitting here in the Nissan booth. We're going to be talking about the new, sort of mostly kind of a little bit new Nissan GTR. We're going to be talking about a new Toyota Prius, a new Miata. Let's dig in. Let's start with Nissan, since we're sitting here in the booth. We're surrounded by some lovely cars.
Incredible GTRs of every generation.
Right, so Nissan's got a new GTR, the 2017 that they showed us, but I think even more impressive is this collection of every generation of the GTR, starting with the 1969, the first Skyline 2000 GTR, and going all the way up through the R33, the 34, and the brand new 2017.
Yeah, they're cars that have lived in our mindset as being these icons, but we really didn't get the chance to see them in the U.S. at all up until recently.
This unrequited love that we've not been able to have until the most recent generation, I should say. The new one, they've got a little bit more power. They've resculpted the nose to get a little bit more air over the radiators for better cooling, better aerodynamics, they say, as well.
Nissan over the years has done a good job every year of improving the GTR just a little bit by bit, but this is probably the biggest shift we've seen in a number of years. The styling is improved, the performance is improved, it's got more power, but I think the biggest improvement is the interior, and it needed it the most.
Yeah, the interior when it came out was kind of revolutionary because it had these Gran Turismo-inspired graphics, actually designed by Kaz Yamauchi, the producer of Gran Turismo, which is pretty cool, but ultimately that was a long time ago, and they really needed a bit of a refresh, and it's good to see that's finally come through.
It was. It felt like the most dated portion of the car, all the cheap plastics inside. It still had good touch points, good steering wheel, good seats, but everything else sort of felt like it was out of a 15-year-old Sentra.
Absolutely. So that's been updated. The car even comes in a very nice orange, they showed it, which is one of my favorite colors. So I think that's great. So one of the highlights of the show for me so far.
Absolutely, me too.
We actually saw a lot of enthusiast cars here in New York. New York is usually a bit more of a practical car show, but we also saw a new version of one of your favorite cars, the MX-5.
Yeah, and it was a bit of a surprise. We knew coming in that they were going to do something with the Miata, and we sort of expected it to be the folding retractable hardtop, just like the last generation. And it is that, but it's also more than that, because it's a retractable fastback. It's got these two kind of lovely flying buttresses behind the headrests, and it gives it a completely different look.
Are we going to see flying buttresses on every car in the near future? It almost seems like we're going that way.
We can only hope, Tim.
Yeah, we've got them on the Ford GT, the new NSX. A lot of cars are going with flying buttresses. It's kind of interesting how everyone's going back to Gothic architecture.
Yeah.
But I guess there's aerodynamic benefits there as well. But it's definitely been a surprise of the show, a surprise star of the show. We heard a little bit of a rumor, as you mentioned, coming into it, but we certainly didn't really know what to expect. And it's definitely been one of the top performing articles for us on the site. So a lot of people are excited about that. Could any other manufacturer have two versions of the same convertible in their product line? Do you think anybody else could get away with that?
That's a good question. I think Chrysler tried it years ago. They had multiple tops on the Sebring, if you can imagine, an altogether different kind of car. But what I think this does is it allows them to bridge the audience that really wanted a coupe, which they've never given in a production model here in the States. It gives a little bit of that coupe-like form and a little bit more weather protection, even with the top down. What I want to know is it adds some weight to it. Does the car still feel as incredible as the regular soft top feels?
Yeah, have they changed any suspension settings or anything to cope with that? And it is, what, about 100 pounds heavier, is that right?
It's about 110 pounds, which is fairly significant in a car that's that light, especially when the weight is generally up top, and a car that's so dependent on weight for great dynamics. I will say it transforms the look of the car. And the hardtop in general creates some more refinement inside, and that's something that if you tool around the soft top in all seasons, with the top up, you kind of want that after a while.
Absolutely. We don't know how much it's going to cost, right? They didn't give us any indication there.
No, but I would expect it to be offered on the upper trim levels only because it's going to be a somewhat expensive proposition. I would probably guess Club and Grand Touring.
Okay. Interesting, but that's definitely been one of the more talked about cars to show floor. And another exciting enthusiast car, the NSX, got a special edition, a racing edition, the GT3 version of the NSX. The NSX, of course, has a lot of fancy high-end powertrain stuff going on there, a really advanced hybrid system. It's got a twin-turbo V6 mated to an electric motor, and up front, 2 more electric motors for the road car. But that makes it pretty tricky to get the car certified and homologated to go racing, so they ripped all that stuff out, gone with just a twin-turbo V6. Now they've got an FIA GT3 legal race car.
Kind of reminds me of the old NSX-R, where it's a little bit more hardcore. It's a rear-wheel drive car, is it not?
It is, with a 6-speed sequential instead of the 9-speed dual clutch.
Sounds interesting.
Sounds all right to me. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Carbon fiber bodywork, no interior, big old roll cage in there. Looks pretty good. They didn't give us a price, but now that we can afford it anyway.
Not that it'd be street legal anyway. No, but down the road, I mean, it may pave the way for a street version, a harder core product.
Right. We've certainly been getting a lot of hints from certain folks in certain places that there is a Type R on the way, and this could be a pretty solid foundation for such a car. I think that a lot of us would love to see and feel what that car would be like with a little bit more raw driving engagement.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's going to be appearing in FIA racing this year. Maybe at Le Mans, probably a little too late for Le Mans this year, but certainly in some endurance racing we should be seeing that. Competing against, Lamborghinis and Porsches and Audis and all sorts of other beautiful cars. I can't wait to see how it does.
Absolutely.
All right, so we talked about fun cars. Maybe we should talk about some more practical stuff before we go too far along.
That's fair. You know, there's all sorts of cars here at the show, and while that's typical, normally we think of a particular show having a certain bent, being the green show, being the SUV show. The New York show this year is sort of all over the map.
Absolutely, it is. And one of the more interesting cars from a more practical standpoint is the new Prius Prime, which is an interesting name, but it's an interesting proposition.
Yeah, another automotive journalist waggishly called it the Primus.
It is a plug-in version of the Prius, and there was a plug-in version of the last generation Prius as well, but Toyota never really put any muscle behind it. They didn't sell very many of the things. It was like they really didn't want anybody to even know that it existed. But with the new one, they've actually been putting a lot of effort into it. They haven't completely restyled it, but they certainly put a lot of work into it, make it a much nicer looking car. It's
got a very different nose, it's got a different taillight treatment, and it suggests that they are putting more effort behind it, Tim. And I think, Prius is one of the sterling brands in all of automotive, in the entire automotive universe. But they expanded the family, and everybody thought that would be a home run. They have the Prius V, which is a C-Max competitor. They have the Prius C, which is the inexpensive version. And then they had the plug-in, and everybody thought all of them would go gangbusters. And honestly, none of them have done very well. Just the core Prius has continued to carry that franchise.
Right. And this is still very much a core Prius. It's ultimately the same car as we see in the current generation, but as you mentioned, with a subtle refresh, but honestly, it's a very effective refresh. I haven't talked to anybody who likes the new Prius, and this is a much cleaner, well, not cleaner, it's a better looking car. We'll leave it at that, I guess.
Yeah, I find it a lot less controversial looking.
I think so too. But more importantly, up to 22 miles of range on a pure electric charge, and it will give an estimated 120 miles per gallon equivalent, which is pretty solid.
It's pretty good. That electric-only range is probably enough for most people's urban commutes. It's maybe not as good as something like the Chevy Volt, but it'll be interesting to see what the market reaction is to it.
It is a little bit disappointing that they couldn't get up toward 30, which is where a lot of other plug-in hybrids are. But I think part of it comes down to packaging and Toyota probably not wanting to add too much weight to the car with a big old battery pack. And maybe it comes down to cost, though like with the MX-5, we don't know how much this is going to cost yet either. Toyota hasn't told us that yet. But ultimately, it's a nicer looking car. I'm curious if they bring this look to the other Prius, or if they leave this to be an exclusive on the plug-in.
Well, and the other thing is inside, right? It has an improved infotainment system.
Right, an 11-inch vertically oriented touchscreen inside the Prius Prime, a lot like the XC90 and the Volvo S90 that we've seen with, which is, I think, the way that these systems should be. We've traditionally seen widescreen displays for GPS and that sort of thing, but that means you can't really see very far ahead of you. But when you turn everything vertically, when you get a portrait orientation, you can see a lot further down the road.
Absolutely, and I think it gives you more real estate that's sensibly organized, where you can have the prime functions up higher and down lower your secondary functions, and maybe you can swipe in panes and out. But it's surprising that more automakers haven't already moved in that direction to me.
Right, and I think they probably will. That is unfortunately going to be an option, so it won't be standard on every new Prius, but it will have Android Auto and Apple's CarPlay involved, so if you've got your smartphone, you want to get your navigation, and from that, instead of from Toyota system, more power to you. I think a lot of people do these days.
Yeah, that sort of sexy Tesla-esque infotainment system, I think will help pull a lot of people into that car that might not otherwise have gotten it.
I think so too. So I think we're all very curious to drive that car. The new Prius has definitely been improved from a dynamic standpoint over the last generation. This will be a little bit heavier than that one, so we'll see how it goes. But definitely one of the more talked about cars here at the show floor. We're going to take a quick break from here in New York, but we'll be right back. We'll talk about some other new cars, some cars from Hyundai and some non-Hyundai, the Genesis as well, and some other good stuff. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to AutoComplete live on tape from the New York International Auto Show floor 2016. My name is Tim Stevens. I'm editor-in-chief of Roadshow and joined by Chris Packard. Hello, sir.
Hello. Hello.
All right, so let's talk about Hyundai. They've got 3 cars that are all the same car, but yet they're not the same car, and they get from A to B in very different ways.
It's like a candy bar. It's 3 cars in one. It's the Ioniq range. And it's sort of covering the waterfront on all of alternative fuels. I mean, it's got a standard hybrid model, there's a plug-in hybrid model, and then there's a pure EV.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's giving consumers the choice of what they want. It also gives Hyundai the ability to spin up one or the other and basically make more of whichever one the consumers want without really making a huge commitment to going full EV or plug-in hybrid or anything else. They can be flexible in that regard. I think it's good. The car looks reasonably nice, but it doesn't look outrageous, doesn't scream, hey, I'm an EV, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, they didn't put a ton of differentiation in between the 3 models. It'll be interesting to see how people feel about that. For a long time, I think we had the mindset that an EV had to look special, had to look like an EV, and then the industry kind of went away from that. And this is sort of, 3 flavors of the same basic form, and hopefully people like that because they're going to have, they're going to be so wedded to it.
Right, but it definitely makes sense, and it gives people the flexibility to choose the car that makes sense for them. And ultimately, we haven't seen as many plug-in hybrids as I think a lot of people are looking for, but ultimately another choice in the EV market is heating up. We've got the Chevy Bolts here on the show floor, and Tesla's unveiling the Model 3 here in a week or so, and it's going to be getting interesting this year. Yeah,
everybody's fighting for a really small slice of the pie. It's frankly, somewhat of a bad time to be introducing these cars because the sales aren't there. The Tesla has a lot of buzz around it and will probably do well with advanced orders. Whether they can carry that over the long tail is something else entirely. Bolt, maybe to a lesser extent. Ioniq, I'm not so sure. Most of the industry seems to be gravitating right now toward crossovers and trucks. So whether these vehicles can turn a profit or not is a really big open question.
Especially with gas prices so low, the demand is a big question mark in a big way. But ultimately, I think it's encouraging anyway from an environmental standpoint, if nothing else.
Absolutely. And automakers need to do this for regulatory purposes as well.
Get ahead of the game there. But that wasn't the only car that Hyundai showed off, although the other one wasn't actually called a Hyundai. It's the new Genesis concept.
Yeah, so you recall earlier this year, they spun off Genesis as their own luxury brand. Not quite all the way like Lexus is for Toyota, but they'll have their own dedicated showroom space and their own budgets, for product development and for promotion. And they've already got a couple of cars in there. They've rebadged the Genesis sedan in an alphanumeric, I think it's G80, and then G90 is the former Equus. And now they're looking at a 3 Series competitor, basically.
Right, and it is a very interesting looking concept for sure, very dramatically styled, very different from what we've seen in the past. I think we all like everything except for the strange sort of gills that the car has, which I don't think any of us are quite sure about.
Yeah, hopefully that's just a show car flourish. There's a yoke steering wheel in it too. Things like that won't see production necessarily.
But the 4K curved widescreen display that goes across the entire dashboard is kind of a nice touch. And a lot of other interesting technology and design signatures that are showing that Hyundai/Genesis are really making an effort to differentiate themselves, and they're not just trying to make a 3 Series competitor that looks like a 3 Series competitor. I think that's good news all around.
Absolutely, it is.
Subaru also showed off a car that maybe does take a little bit of direct styling influence from the competition. It's the new Impreza. I'm a big Subaru fan, so I was eager to see this car. And it looks a lot like a Mazda, I think you have to say.
A Mazda of past years, I would say, with it's got some pretty aggressive body creases along the side. It's a lot more sculpted, and frankly, for me, Subarus have sort of been, on some level, and no offense as a Subaru owner, anti-style or style-free, like almost willfully so.
Yep.
So it's interesting to see them go for what is a comparatively high-style vehicle.
Yeah, and I don't know how well that's going to play. I've bought all of my Subarus despite not liking the way that any of them looked, but it's because of practicality and everything else. This is a significantly larger car than the outgoing Impreza. The Impreza has been growing a lot. With every generation, it seems to grow an inch or two, and it continues in this new car. They did confirm there will be a hatchback version, which is good. There's always a bit of a question mark here in the U.S. about those things, but we have only seen the sedans thus far. Looks nice enough, but I think most importantly, this platform is designed from the ground up to be able to be a hybrid, which is something that Subaru's been really lacking in a lot of ways. So that should help the Impreza, I think, stay a little bit more modern and a little bit more in touch with a lot of consumers are looking for. But, you know, my heart is still with the WRX and the STI, and I think we've got to wait another year before the WRX shows up, and then probably another year before the STI shows up.
Yeah, and, you know, I think that's okay, because the current car is holding up well. And frankly, the more flamboyant styling of something like a WRX or an STI lends itself a little bit better to this more, you know, dramatic styling language that they're adopting here. And I think they needed to grow the car a little bit, because a lot of the vehicles in that segment, cars like the Civic, are now so big inside that they're classified as a mid-size car. It's crazy. But what that's been doing actually is letting automakers slot yet another model underneath when they get too big. So you've got things like the Honda Fit that came on, and I'm wondering if eventually they'll have to do that at Subaru as well.
I hope they do. It'd be nice for them to make, you know, the equivalent. The M3 has grown up so big that now we need an M2. Maybe the WRX has grown up so much that we need a WRX Junior. Absolutely. There has been a lot of talk about a mid-engine Subaru sports car of some sort, which would be
tasty.
Be all right by my book. All right. Yeah. Although we did see a slightly redesigned Subaru, the BRZ's gotten a little bit of a front-end update, but more importantly, the Scion FRS is now a Toyota, the 86.
It is. Well, the Scion brand is going away after kind of petering out for the last half decade or longer, and they've done some meaningful improvements with it. I think the styling is improved, maybe a little bit fussier, but certainly more modern. It gets a tiny little bit more power, but the interior got a pretty nice upgrade, and that's the area, again, that needed the most attention to me.
Right, it looks more aggressive, which I think is important, and it ties into the heritage of the car, which is in Japan, the AE86, the GT86. That's what a lot of people have actually imported those badges from Japan to change the signs over to Toyota. So maybe now, if you are a fan of your Hachiroku in Japan, you won't have to spend extra money to import the badging from Tokyo.
Yeah, it'll be right there, and I think honestly it's probably going to sell more as a Toyota than it did as a Scion, which I think is probably true of all the models that were pulled over, just because there's more dealer points. People respect and know the Toyota brand name more than they do Scion, so it's probably going to be a good move sales-wise for those brand lines.
I think so too. Boy, that's taking us around the show floor. What else? What have we missed, Chris? Is there anything else hovering around? I see the Camaro Z01 that's behind us. It looks pretty all right.
Well, the looming shadow has gull-wing doors, Tim.
Oh, right. How could I forget the largest, most massive car on the show floor? At least the largest doors on the show floor.
Well, actually, it might be because the whole show is actually taking place inside the Lincoln Navigator concept.
Yeah, Lincoln showed off a new look concept at an event early Monday, and then we had to check it out a little ahead of the show floor. And they teased us by saying it was going to be a gull-wing concept and a two-door, and what we thought it was going to be an SUV. And sure enough, it was all things. A two-door SUV with the most ridiculously huge doors you've ever seen in your life. Not
just ridiculously huge doors, but multiple stairs, concertina steps to get to them. I'm surprised there's not a power-folding red carpet that just jettisons out.
It's amazing. The Continental concept, which we saw last year, was inspired by luxury aviation, personal aviation, your Learjets and your like. This car is inspired by luxury nautical travel, so yachts and things. It has teak inlays on those steps we mentioned before, a lot of other nautical touches. The PRNDL gear selector is inspired by piano keys, which is interesting. A lot of nice designer touches, but it still has the quiet luxury idea that I think that we're both fans of from a Lincoln standpoint.
Yeah, you know what? I think the scale is also quite nautical, and obviously the Navigator is a huge thing physically, yeah. But that's what the market wants, and you know, the Navigator has sold quite well over the years, a little bit less so lately, but it is an aging proposition.
Right.
But that market is still there. The people that want that 3 rows of luxury and want to be able to tow, and they need the body-on-frame structure, and it's a cash cow even now for Ford. So it's smart that they're doing another one. The styling certainly won't be for everybody. It's a little Baroque, it's a little over the top, but I think that's kind of what the market calls for.
Right, and it ties it right in line with the Continental, which is that the big chrome nose that they're going with everything going forward. So, but I think in general that's a nice step forward, certainly an improvement over what they had before.
Yeah, and the production version will certainly not have gull-wing doors, and will be a bit more rational all the way around.
You would need a parking garage the size of an airplane hangar to park that thing otherwise, because those doors go way up when they open. All right, I think that covers everything here at the New York International Show floor, and they're starting to build a GTR engine behind us, so things are getting a little bit noisy, which is probably a good time for us to sign off from here on the show floor. Chris, car of the show, quickly.
Tough call. My heart is with the Miata. I'm curious to see how that car drives and if it feels like a full convertible or if it feels like a Targa. But aesthetically, I think it's beautiful, and I think it'll extend the brand and bring in a new audience. I would say the NSX GT3, but since I can't actually own one of those, I'll go with the GTR, because ultimately it's a great car. It's amazing how long that car has lived on, and as much as I'm looking forward to the next generation, I'm really looking forward to driving the new one, and I want to see what these guys do when they put together the motor right behind us. All right, we're going to wrap things up here from the show floor and AutoComplete. Definitely check out the coverage at theroadshow.com, and we'll be back next week with your week news and maybe an update on what's going on with Tesla. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Now, to follow up more on all those stories and get a lot more photos, slideshows, videos, and specs and details, head over to theroadshow.com. It's easy to spot our New York International Auto Show special feature area, which is populating as we speak. March 24th, I mentioned, was an important date to know that we are taping on that day, because today's a deadline day, and by the time we finish this day, things may have changed in the VW Dieselgate court saga. In the Ninth Circuit, U.S. federal court, today is supposedly the deadline by Justice Breyer to say, wait a minute, I need to hear from you, Volkswagen, that you've either got a plan agreed on with the feds and with California to remedy your cars, or you don't. The word is now that VW doesn't, but will soon, and has been asked for a 2-week extension of the deadline to get their house in order and figure out what they're going to do with your cars, of those hundreds of thousands that you've got that are spewing emissions illegally. So here is still the mix that we expect to see worked with. Some cars will get fixed through software and hardware updates. Some cars may get bought back. A buyback is still apparently on the table for some vehicles. And some vehicles may not be fixable in a satisfactory way, nor be bought back, and will be given an exemption to stay on the road and just spew the rest of their life until they're scrapped, and that VW is going to pay into a fund to compensate for other environmental remedies that will offset that. So that's the mix we're looking at. We expect there to be another 2 weeks before we hear back from the Ninth Circuit Court, which is overseeing this. But this is kind of the most sharp point that is being put on the story right now, and the court that is moving the most aggressively. You've got other actions going on with all kinds of class action suits by owners. You've got dealers that are going after the company, saying that they need some reparations because their business has been harmed by the ugly halo around the Volkswagen brand. So we're keeping an eye on all of these, but the one that matters most to you is Ninth Circuit Court, and we expect a 2-week delay before they decide if Volkswagen has a method to remedy you. Now, in all of this world of $2 gas we're talking about these days, a lot of folks ask us here at the Roadshow what's the future of EVs? Are they selling worth a damn now? I mean, the pure electrics for sure, even the plug-in hybrids. We've just looked at some numbers as of the end of February. We'll have our Q1 numbers in about a week or two. And here's what's interesting, is a lot of the EVs out there are selling better, and some of them are selling worse. For example, Tesla Model S is up 150 units compared to the first 2 months of last year. The Model X is a brand new vehicle, obviously. You can't compare that to last year, but they've sold 770 through February. It's a good number for a company that's small like Tesla. The Chevy Volt is a breakout star. It's plus 887 units in the first 2 months compared to 2015. It has a nice fat delta there. And that's even in the fact that the Chevy Bolt is still coming down the road, and you would think would maybe have some owners stay on the sidelines and say, well, I'll wait for the pure EV because it looks really good. But apparently not holding back a lot of folks. Ford Fusion Energy up about 500 units as well. On the other hand, some of the pure electric compact urban style cars are not doing well. Nissan Leaf is down about 600 units over the same 2 months last year, and the BMW i3 has cratered. It's down over 1,300 units over the same 2 months last year. Now, these are all vehicles that sell in pretty small numbers, so when I quote you 700 or 800 up, 600 or 1,000 down, that's meaningful trend on these cars. They don't sell like F-150, right? So it's a split market. Overall, though, the EV space for plug-ins and pure battery electrics is up about 1,100 cars first 2 months over last year. It's generally doing well, even though we have dramatically low gas prices around most of the U.S. right now. So an interesting story that we will keep an eye on. as we go through the year. And we'll have our full Q1 numbers probably next time we do the show. We talked last time about automatic emergency braking, about how by September 1, 2022, just about every automaker in the U.S. market has agreed to put it on just about every car they sell here. So it's an amazing shift. Even though it's not going to be required, there's an agreement. Well, Toyota is one of the first to get out of the gate. They have told Automotive News that they are going to have 25 of the 30 models they make at Toyota and Lexus. Remember, Scion is gone now. 25 of their 30 models will be equipped with a package that includes automatic emergency braking as standard by the end of next year. So several years, a full 5 years ahead of the agreement, they're going to have virtually their entire line covered with automatic emergency braking and a few other driver assists for safety. So there's an example of a company that, interestingly, has been kind of throwing cold water on the self-driving car model. They're very skeptical of the full self-driver. On the other hand, they've said they're very bullish on deep driver assists. So perhaps it makes complete sense that they are embracing automatic emergency braking very aggressively. And from what we've seen so far, earlier than any other car maker, in depth across their line. All right, folks, that's it for AutoComplete this week, episode 11. Don't forget, the latest on cars, technology, and the intersection of them is always awaiting you fresh at Roadshow, theroadshow.com. I'm Brian Cooley. We'll see you next week.